Welcome back. I'm Dr. Sheik and I'm a licensed clinical psychologist, and today we're going to be talking about different types of mental health providers. And if you can't tell by the title, we're going to be talking about the power of titles. So with that being said, let's get started. There are different levels of mental health providers even within the United States, and I want to have a disclaimer. I'm going to be focusing primarily on the United States. I'm going to talk a little bit about other countries, but that'll come later in the video, but that's going to be related to restrictions around the use of the title psychologist. But for now, I want to focus on the United States and the requirements and the credentialing needed for providers in the United States. So there are different levels of providers in the US. So there are doctorate level providers. So those are your psychiatrists. Those are the individuals who have a doctorate in medicine, or they are a doctor of medicine. They've attended medical school. They went through the same requirements as other medical physicians, but they focus primarily in the area of psychiatry. They typically prescribe medication, but some of them also do talk therapy or psychotherapy. That's not every psychiatrist, but some psychiatrists do psychotherapy and talk therapy. Then there are individuals who have an academic doctorate. So those are the individuals like a psychologist like myself who is a doctor of psychology or has a doctorate of psychology. And those are also individuals who have a doctorate of philosophy in psychology. And that can be in clinical psychology, that can be in school psychology, and that can be in counseling psychology. All of those are doctorate level providers. And most doctorate level providers with psychology degrees, their primary focus is on diagnosing and treating mental health disorders, but they also have the ability to do assessments. So those are personality assessments, neurocognitive assessments, school psych assessments, school evaluations. Those are those individuals. That's a doctorate level. Now you also have master's level providers. So those are your licensed clinical social workers, the licensed independent clinical social workers, your licensed professional counselors, your licensed marriage and family therapists, and your licensed independent drug and alcohol counselors. Those are your master's level providers. They also treat and diagnose mental health concerns. And then there are other medical practitioners like nurse practitioners and those who have a doctorate in pharmacologists or PharmDs. Those are individuals who can also prescribe mental health medications, but I believe there are restrictions around the mental health medications that they can prescribe. They can prescribe most mental health medications outside of those that are considered in the class of like a benzodiazepine. And a benzodiazepine is something like a Xanax or a Valium or something that can be habit forming. I think that is actually restricted to only being prescribed by like psychiatrists. You can check on that if I'm incorrect or not, but I believe that is the case. So those are your mental health providers. These are the individuals who have to have some level of licensure in order to actually provide therapy services in the US. So all of these providers actually have to be licensed in their respective fields. They actually also have to carry malpractice insurance. They also are held to different ethical standards when it comes to conducting themselves in the therapy room and outside of the therapy room with respect to clients and patient information and client information. But they also carry what we call a national provider identification number. Now, each one of these providers that I listed before, doctorate level, master's level, and just the other practitioners, all have to obtain an MPI number to actually practice, because this lets you know that you have the ability to practice within a healthcare setting. And mental health services are provided within the healthcare service field. So you have to have an MPI number to practice as a provider in this space. There are several caveats to that. The two primary ones that I'm thinking of are those who work as organizational development psychologists. Those individuals typically do not need a license. The reason they don't need a license is because they're normally not doing mental health services. They're not diagnosing or treating any mental health illnesses. They are primarily focused on doing executive coaching, executive assessment, leadership assessments, making sure your organization has the appropriate leadership and the appropriate parties at the appropriate leadership levels to make sure your organization runs smoothly. So they don't need a license. And then there's also probably about 10 to 15 years ago, some states allowed master's level school psychologists to be considered school psychologists. I think now there is a requirement for you to have a doctorate in order to be considered a school psychologist in most states in the United States. But as a school psychologist on the master's level, you could still do school psych assessments. You could still provide those individual and group treatment sessions for students in the school setting. So your primary service organization or where you primarily practice was in a school setting. Those are the two caveats. Now, outside of that, there are other wellness providers. Those are your life coaches or your peer specialists. Life coaches and peer specialists do not have the ability to diagnose or treat mental health disorders. These are the individuals who have lived experience of dealing with and healing from, in most cases, a mental health concern, whether it be anxiety, depression, or post-traumatic stress disorder. So these are the individuals who feel like they have navigated the space of mental health and want to be able to provide that assistance to someone else. They are typically focused on helping individuals navigate life with mental health disorders. Those wellness providers, I'm not sure that they have those same ethical standards or licensure standards. I know there's a certification process for a life coach and a peer specialist, but I don't think there are like licensure requirements or the requirement to carry malpractice insurance because they're not treating or diagnosing mental health disorders. So, like I said, you have your mental health providers. Those are the people who have license requirements, ethical requirements, malpractice insurance and requirements, because they're going to be held to a different standard because of the information that they're providing to clients. And most licensures require that you get a renewal every 2 years. And within those 2 years, you have to meet certain continuing education requirements in order to qualify to have your license renewed. So we are having to be educated every year in the changes that are occurring in mental health to maintain our license. That's mental health. However, not all psychologists are psychologists. And what do I mean by that? What I mean by that is that there are certain countries outside of the United States that do not legally protect the title of psychologist. In the US, you cannot be called a psychologist unless you have a license and a doctorate level degree. There are countries outside the US where you can call yourself a psychologist if you've completed a bachelor's level degree in psychology. Or you can simply be calling yourself a psychologist because you want to, because there is no legal restrictions around the title of psychologist. And I'll put a list here of the countries, and there are mainly European countries that do not have a legal protection of the title of psychologist. The reason why this matters is because these individuals sometimes have very large social media platforms and very large social media followings. And if we aren't really clear by now about the power of titles, with us knowing how to make a video title catchy so people would be drawn to it, then we're not really understanding the power that is inherent in a title. A part of what I learned as a psychologist in graduate school was that when we walk into a therapy room, there is this inherent power that a psychologist has because they are considered the expert in the room. And you're considered the expert in the room because the expectation is you've completed the level of training and education to have a better understanding of human behavior and mental health. So there is a power dynamic that exists within the therapy room, and we have to be humble enough and aware enough of that power dynamic to make sure that whatever we say in the therapy room or outside of the therapy room is not something that will be hurtful or harmful to anyone else. And we can be held liable for that as well, which is hence the reason for malpractice insurance. So individuals who operate outside the United States, who aren't legally restricted from using the title of psychologist, are not bound by those same requirements or those same standards. So they can make claims, they can make statements that aren't backed by any level of training or education or understanding of human behavior, and they will not be held accountable for it. So the reason why this is important is that I encourage you to know where you're getting your information from. And this became very clear to me when I started to look at certain individuals on social media platforms, and one of them was on Instagram that had like over 150,000 followers, and one of them was a reputable like mental health facility that followed this individual that considered themselves a psychologist. And when I looked into their credentials and their background information, they did not have a doctorate in psychology. They had a bachelor's in psychology, and they had a master's in business and marketing. And if anybody understands psychology, social psychology, business, and marketing, you understand that a large part of marketing and branding is the ability to persuade or negotiate with individuals. And you have to have a certain level of understanding of human behavior in order to be able to persuade people to purchase or buy something that they either don't need or don't want or don't know that they need in that moment. So that's a part of marketing. So I see how an individual could put out information that seems very educated, that seems very real, that seems very digestible, that seem like they have the level of education and training to be speaking on this level. If they have a basic understanding of psychology and a master's level understanding of marketing, because you have two aspects of human behavior that you're understanding. However, you are missing those nuances that are needed to understand mental health disorders or mental health challenges. You understand human behavior enough to be able to market and brand, but you don't understand human behavior enough to make sure that what you're saying in the realm of mental health is encompassing of everyone who actually deals with mental health concerns. The Instagrammer called themselves a psychologist, and they are legally able to call their self a psychologist because they operate out of Amsterdam, and the Netherlands do not restrict the use of the title of psychologist. Another one was a YouTuber who operates within the US, but one of the panelists or one of the people they had on their platform was someone who operated within the UK. And the UK is also another country that does not restrict the use of the title psychologist. And this person was speaking about relationships, and they titled them as a psychologist. But when I looked at their credentials, they also did not have a doctorate level degree in psychology. And I believe they had a master's in social work or counseling. I cannot remember what their master's was in, but it was in the realm of mental health. So I wrote an email to this YouTuber who has millions of followers, and each of their videos get no less than 1 million views. And I emailed this YouTuber and just let them know that like maybe you should consider changing the title because there is an inherent bias or an inherent power attached to calling someone a psychologist. And this YouTuber seemed a bit offended in their response. One, I applaud them for responding directly to me themselves because someone with that larger a platform, you wouldn't think they would respond, but they did, and I appreciate that. But they responded, and they seemed offended because they let me know that they'd gotten good advice from people who were not educated before, and they also would probably get better advice moving forward or greater advice moving forward from this quote-unquote psychologist. And they let me know that they had asked this person if they wanted to be considered a psychologist or a psychotherapist or a relationship expert, and they chose to be called a psychologist. And this YouTuber said they felt like the title didn't matter to them. And for him to make that statement at the same time, not understanding why this person chose to be called a psychologist as opposed to a psychotherapist or a relationship expert, lets me know that they don't understand the power of titles, or they do understand the power of titles and they used it to their advantage. Because labeling this person as a psychologist, knowing that they don't have the level of training and expertise to be a psychologist, is like me walking into a room and saying I'm a doctor. And technically I am a doctor, but if I simply say I'm Dr. Cheek and someone walks up to me, or if I say I'm Dr. Cheek and I give medical advice, I am a doctor, so I can say I could give that medical advice because I am a doctor, and my title inherently makes others believe that I have the ability and the expertise and the training to speak to whatever medical advice I'm given. However, I am not medically trained, but being called a doctor makes others believe that I am medically trained. So what I'm saying holds more value than someone simply saying that, yes, I have an academic doctorate, so I'm just giving you this information from my educated stance. that I feel like I'm educated to give, although I'm not, because I'm not a medical doctor. So having someone call themselves a psychologist, knowing that they don't have that level of training and expertise, and having your audience believe that they have this level of training and expertise is just as faulty and deceptive as me telling someone I'm a doctor and simply allowing them to believe that I know anything about their medical concerns. So that's another caveat as well, is when you see someone online, and I'm seeing that a lot as well on social media too, is that individuals referring to themselves as doctors. However, when I look at their credentials, their doctorate is in anything else other than mental health, but they're speaking primarily about mental health. And that's very concerning to me, because we know right now mental health is the topic du jour. Every topic seems to broach mental health in some way or another. So that seems to be the platform that everyone wants to kind of have a say in, simply because they experience emotions on a daily basis. And simply having emotions does not make you an expert in knowing how to treat and diagnose mental health disorders, and does not give you the level of expertise or training to be able to kind of speak to that to other people. And I don't know if everyone understands that power dynamic and understands that when you call yourself by a specific title, people are more willing to listen and believe what you're saying than they would if you didn't call yourself by that title. So titles and words have power. So what I hope you've learned from today is that some people on these social media sites are able to call themselves by the title of psychologist who do not have the same level of training and expertise as a psychologist within the United States or as a psychologist in other countries as well. They just don't have that training, but there are no legal restrictions keeping them from calling themselves a psychologist on these social media platforms. And simply because someone has an opinion, and we all know the old saying about opinions are like buttholes and some of them stink. So simply because someone can have a beautifully smelling opinion because they sprayed enough perfume on it that make it looks very presentable and like it's wrapped in a beautiful nice bow, and it feels like it's something that makes sense and I can relate to it, I can agree with it, does not mean that it's coming from a reputable source. So I encourage you to kind of make sure that when you're listening to or you're getting advice or information from some of these individuals on social media sites, whatever social media site that may be, whether it's Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, Facebook, whatever, that you are able to check their credentials. And some of these individuals, you can look at their own webpage and see that nothing about them says that they have a doctorate in mental health or they have the necessary level of training and expertise to be speaking about certain mental health concerns. So I encourage you to do your research before taking on or internalizing some of the information that you listen to or read online. Just my encouragement, just my 2 cents from a psychologist, and just from a person who understands that what I say is not always taken with a grain of salt. So I hope you learned something from this conversation today. Jot down any questions or concerns you have below. I thank you for listening, and I'll be speaking with you again or seeing you again very soon. Thank you.